Hello everyone from the Novedge team. Welcome to today's webinar introducing V-Ray 3 for SketchUp. V-Ray for SketchUp has been redesigned from the ground up. The new user interface is clean and simple. With quick presets and streamlined controls, you can focus on being creative without worrying about the technical stuff. Now it's faster and easier to create great looking renders right in SketchUp. Our webinar presenter, Ben Hurlbut, is a 3D artist with an extensive knowledge of V-Ray, Revit, Rhino, Grasshopper, 3ds Max, and SketchUp, and he became a member of the Chaos Group Baltimore office in 2014 as a 3D artist. Before we get going, I want to show you the Novedge page where you can find all our V-Ray products. And Novedge is one of the largest online stores for design software. We offer huge assortments of software solutions that cater to virtually every designer's need. What are you waiting for? Go get your V-Ray for SketchUp right now, or V-Ray 3.0 for Rhino. And for more daily software news and limited time promotion and announcement, visit the Novedge blog or look for us on Facebook, Google+, and Twitter. Coming up in 2 weeks, a webinar on 3D PDF myths and truths. Last but not least, today's webinar is free and is being recorded. So if you want to rewatch it, just head on over to the Novedge's YouTube and Vimeo channel. And now I'm gonna share Ben's screen so he can show you all about V-Ray for SketchUp. And you should be able to see Ben's video. There it is. Okay, take it away, Ben.
All right. Hello. My name is Ben, a 3D specialist with Chaos Group. And welcome to introducing V-Ray 3 for SketchUp. Then a little bit about myself. Again, I'm a 3D artist and AEC specialist. I have a master's degree in architecture and about 5 years in the AEC industry. And here's my email if you'd like to contact me directly. A quick overview of what we're going to cover. This includes a brief look at our design philosophy behind V-Ray for SketchUp's new interface. We'll then go over a few of the major features in V-Ray for SketchUp with demonstrations using a small selection of architecture scenes. There's essentially two types of artists who create visualizations. There's the designer, who treats the rendering as essentially one tool among many in a large toolkit. While visualization is important, it's not the primary focus. And then there's the visualization expert, who's the specialist whose primary role is to produce high-quality imagery. The visualization is the primary focus and the final result. And V-Ray for SketchUp's new interface was developed with the designers in mind, while still having the power of the extensive tool set that comes with V-Ray for advanced users. By default, it's easy to pick up and use to achieve high-quality imagery. This allows you to spend less time fiddling with the tool and more time on what really matters, which is your design. This is all without sacrificing the expanded tool set for visualization experts to tinker and tweak to your heart's content. So ultimately, it comes down to V-Ray being easy, powerful, and fast. And this leads us to the new interface. Everything you need is right at your fingertips, while the more detailed features can easily be accessed with rollouts and expanded areas inside the interface. So let's take a quick look at the new interface. And you'll notice right away there's 3 new toolbars. The first one is the main toolbar, which has the asset editor, the render buttons, and the frame buffer buttons. Up next is the lighting toolbar and then the geometry toolbar. Let's go ahead and open the asset editor, which is the kind of the nerve center of V-Ray for SketchUp. Sorry, my video paused. Let's see, and then there's 4 main tabs inside the asset editor. There's the materials tab, the lights tab, the geometry tab, and the settings tab. And then we also have a duplicate render button and show frame buffer button at the top right. And then there's a panel that expands from the right, which has more advanced settings, which changes with whichever tab you have selected. And then for the Materials tab, we also have an expandable left panel, which includes the material library that comes with V-Ray for SketchUp. So V-Ray is a very flexible rendering engine that allows you to easily switch between modes depending on what stage of the design and visualization process you're in. There's interactive rendering, which is available so changes you make in the scene will update in the rendering without having to stop and start the process manually. There's production rendering, which is when you disable interactive rendering is best used to achieve your final results. And then for those of you that have good GPU hardware, you can also use your GPU rather than your CPU. Now, as you can see, if you go to the Settings tab, you can easily switch between the different settings. And there's some intelligence built in that will switch them automatically as you go. And you also notice when you disable interactive that there's a quality slider available. And so those of you out there who don't know how to necessarily tweak what was traditionally the settings in V-Ray, you can easily just use the quality slider instead. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start a quick interactive rendering. I'm going to enable material overrides, which will override all the materials in your scene with either a simple color or a material. And as you can see with interactive mode enabled, as we move around in the SketchUp viewport, it updates in the frame buffer as well. And the frame buffer is what we call the rendering window in V-Ray. And I'm going to stop this rendering and go back and enable GPU. And depending on what hardware you have, this can be many times faster compared to just using your CPU. Just for reference, the computer I used for this demonstration was using, I believe, 3 older GTX Titan X's by NVIDIA. And this is using just the GPUs in the machine. Okay, next I'm going to go in and disable interactive and disable GPU acceleration. Now with interactive disabled, you're in production mode and you have more advanced features available like your global illumination settings, which handles your secondary light bounces. And again, these are all things that are more advanced. You typically only need to just adjust your quality. I'm going to disable material overrides for this rendering as well. But we design this in a way that so you don't have to necessarily know what global illumination is or adjust all your ray trace settings. Just adjust your quality setting and hit render and you're good to go. And then since we also disabled progressive, you'll notice this is rendering with buckets. And these are some of the more advanced features that you can tweak. And you'll notice too that these are also linked to the quality slider, so as I change the quality slider, it's actually affecting all the settings behind the scenes, so you don't actually have to worry about that. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take what I have here and I'm going to produce more of a finalized rendering, and to do that all I really need to do is change the quality to high And then I'm going to adjust the render output size. I'm going to do something a little bit larger, 1920 by 1080. And I'm also going to enable Swarm, which is our new distributive rendering solution. This has a lot of intelligence built in so that it will discover all the swarm nodes on your network, and then based on what percentage goal you set the slider to, which I'm going to demonstrate once this gets started, is how many machines on the network that V-Ray will choose to add to the rendering. So right now it's set to 100%, and it's going to, you'll see the usage is at 52% right now, and it's adding additional machines. And then if I move the slider to the left, it'll remove some of those machines dynamically on the fly. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 100% to use as many machines as possible. And I'm still using buckets, and you can actually see the additional machines rendering individual buckets as they jump in to assist in the rendering. Now I sped up time a little bit here just so we don't have to sit and wait, but this rendering took about 6.5 minutes total. All right, moving on to the camera. Camera controls are very easy to use in V-Ray for SketchUp. From previous versions, we wanted to make sure the camera features such as exposure and depth of field were more accessible and easier to use for all users. We also added the ability to easily create images for interactive panoramas or VR, like for VR headsets such as the Vive, for example. So this already has interactive rendering going, and what I'm going to do is go to my camera settings and start adjusting the exposure. And you'll notice that it affects the rendering in real time. And I can also adjust the white balance simply by selecting this, changing the color, like let's say to a bluish color, which will make the image warmer, or a warmer color, which will make the image cooler. But I'll go ahead and return this to white. And you can also expand these settings to something you'd see on an actual camera, like aperture and shutter speed and such. And then for depth of field, I'm going to go ahead and enable this, and it's a simple defocus slider. The more defocus amount, the less focused the image will be. And then you can also manually set a focus distance, or there's also a button built in where you can just select a point on the model, and then it'll now focus on that point. So right now we're focused on this corner. And then we also have some other effects, including vignetting and vertical tilt. Now we also have the camera types, and this is how you can do panoramas and VR type renderings. And you'll notice that stereo mode, which allows you to make something 3D, is disabled. That's because it doesn't work with interactive. But as soon as we disable interactive, I can now produce the rendering. And I'm going to go ahead and move my camera down closer to the street level. And you'll notice also that when I switch this to a cube map, it'll update automatically with the right aspect ratio. A cube map is a pretty standard format that most VR headsets use, such as Oculus, the Vive, Google Cardboard, etc. And it's essentially a cube, so a 6-sided cube that it renders out, and then the software for whichever headset recognizes how to put that all together. And since this is a stereoscopic one, it would be 2 cubes, so essentially 2 6-sided cubes making 12 squares. And I have a version of this with some better materials that you can see inside of a panorama viewer. You can easily create something that's interactive, either 2D like this or 3D that you can put in a headset. V-Ray for SketchUp uses the sun settings from SketchUp to generate its physically correct sun and sky in conjunction with the physical camera built into V-Ray for SketchUp. Then we also have aerial perspective, which is an atmospheric effect you can use to create haze and fog in your scenes. So what I'm going to do is start an interactive rendering in this scene. And then you'll notice that as I change the date and time within SketchUp, it'll update in the rendering in real time. And also if I enable the shadows in SketchUp, you'll notice that the shadows line up from SketchUp to V-Ray. And to edit the sun's properties, all I need to do is in the asset editor, I can go to the lights tab, and the sun is actually listed as one of the lights in the scene. In here I can make changes to the sun and the environment, including the intensity. So as you affect this, it affects the intensity of the sun in the scene. There's also the size multiplier, which is really useful. The default is pretty close to the real thing, using a setting of 2 or 3, but if you set it to 1, the shadows become very harsh. And if you set it to 12, you'll notice that the shadows become very soft. And you can create some really nice kind of stylized effects with this. And then another important setting is the ground albedo color. This is the color of the horizon of the background as it approaches the horizon. And you'll notice as I change it to orange, it affects the horizon color. And I'm going to go ahead and change this to kind of a blue color to give the impression of a kind of an ocean background. Now, let's go ahead and look at the aerial perspective settings, which is under the environment rollout. My aerial perspective is actually already on for this scene, but I'm going to go ahead and change some of the settings so you can see how it affects the scene. So if I change the visibility range to something a lot closer, you'll notice a much more prominent fog effect. You can also adjust the atmosphere height, which will change where the top level of the fog is. I just changed the level to 8, which puts it below the camera, which looks a little funny, but it's usually best to leave this at default. Then you can also affect the background and affect the environment. Typically, if you want to create an actual aerial perspective effect, which is the haze on objects that are far off in the distance, you don't need these to be on, but if you're using this to simulate fog, you want to have these on. You'll notice how it changes the background. Moving on to lighting, V-Ray for SketchUp has a wide variety of features available for lighting your scene besides just the sun. You can use an image to encompass and light your scene using the dome light. There's a variety of simple light shapes you can insert into the scene, including planes, spheres, and omni-lights. Spotlights are available to create physically accurate area lights. And you can even convert SketchUp groups and components into mesh lights. And then there's also the IES light, which uses IES files. You can find these from manufacturers, or there's some generic ones available as well to light your scene. And then finally, we have the light list in the asset editor, which is a new feature in V-Ray 3 for SketchUp, so you can easily see, find, and modify all the lights in your scene. Now if we look at the toolbar, you'll notice we have all the lights available. There's the plane light, there's the sphere light, the spotlight, and the IS light, which you need IS files to use, the Omni light, and then we have the dome light. And those are simple lights you can just place. And then after that we have the mesh light, where you select a group or component to convert it. And then we have the adjust light intensity tool, which I'll go over in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and add a dome light to the scene. And you'll notice right away in the rendering, the background changes. But the sun is still coming through, so I'm going to go ahead and disable that. And that's as easy as going to the sunlight and disabling it. And now the dome light, which uses an image file, is lighting the scene. And V-Ray for SketchUp is going to come with one of these by default, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to load a different one. This is one that was made by an artist named Peter Guthrie, and there's plenty of dome lights available on the internet for free or for sale. Now you can also use a color to light your scene instead of an image. So if I disable the texture and start changing the color, you'll notice how this changes the lighting in the scene. And then you adjust the intensity. But I'm going to go ahead and re-enable the texture, since this is what I want. I'm going to increase the intensity to better light my scene. And then it's also easy to rotate the dome light. And one of the ways you can do this is just by going to the options and enabling the lock dome light checkbox. And what this does is lock the rotation of the dome light to the rotation of the object in the scene. So if I rotate this component around in SketchUp, you'll notice that it is also rotating the light in the scene as well, in the rendering, sorry. But the other way you can do this is by going to the properties for the texture and going to the UVW properties, and I'm just going to adjust the horizontal rotation of the texture itself. And you can also adjust the vertical rotation, although typically you don't need to do that. All right, next I'm going to adjust the lighting on these bollards in this corner back here. I'm going to zoom in. These are components, and what I'm going to do is go into the component, and I want this object to become a mesh light. So all I need to do is select it, click on mesh light. This just has to be a group or component to work, and you'll notice it's now converted to a light. And if I go to the light list, it's now listed as one of my lights. So I'm going to go ahead and start an interactive rendering. And you'll notice that these are now producing light in the scene. But they're not as intense as I'd like. So just like the other lights, all you need to do is go to the intensity and start either playing with the slider or entering a new value. And then there's also the adjust light intensity tool, which allows you to click and drag on the light to easily adjust the light without having to go to the settings. And then you can also adjust the color as well, which is great if you want to make this, let's say, like a warmer color. Maybe that's too warm. I adjust it to an orange, make it a little bit closer to white. So then it's easy to create kind of a warmish light effect. And moving on to materials. V-Ray for SketchUp comes with an extensive library of pre-made materials, along with a powerful tool set to customize those materials or create your own unique materials. There's also a powerful set of textures and material layers available to create things like stochastic flakes, which is like a metal flake in paint, V-Ray dirt and curvature to add procedural edge wear, and a material, a material type, called SSS2, which is used for creating accurate subsurface scattering for materials such as skin or transparent plastics or, let's say, marble. So what I have here is a blank scene. There's only one material applied to everything, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the material library to fill out this scene. So I'm going to go ahead and open the asset editor. And you'll see for the materials there's a material preview which is automatically updated depending on what changes you make to the material, as well as a material list of the materials in the scene. And this is the same list of materials that will come up when you open your SketchUp material list, but this of course has all the added V-Ray properties. And you can also customize your library tabs as well. And you'll see as soon as I open one of these categories, you'll be presented with a list of thumbnails that you can increase and decrease the size of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding materials. I'm going to go ahead and select the table legs, go to the wood and laminate section, find a wood that I like this dark one. Just drag it into your list of materials, right click and click on apply to selection, and it'll be applied. You'll also notice that this has a different material preview scene, and you can actually change this as well depending on what works best for the type of material. And so this is going to go ahead and go through applying materials to the rest of the scene. You'll notice we have a pretty extensive library, mostly focused around architectural materials. Like we have woods, these are plastics right now that we're applying. Then next we'll apply some materials to the laptop. And we've tried to make this as easy as possible. It's like a coloring book basically. And for these caps on the legs, I'm going to go ahead and use anodized aluminum. I'll use a wood material for the shelving. And a nice kind of polished concrete for the floor. And then for the back wall, I'm going to use, so we have some wall coverings available, but I think actually I'm going to use a brick texture instead. Now, these are easy to apply, and they're usually set up to a good size already, but you can also easily go in and just modify the settings for each of these materials. It's like I don't like the size of this brick, let's say. I'd like to make it a little bit larger. So if I expand the advanced settings with the panel on the right, I could adjust the textures for each piece of the material, but the easiest thing to do is to just go to the material properties in SketchUp and change the size here. And it'll update. Right, the next thing I'm going to do is add some porcelain to the cups in the scene. So just select those and apply the material to selection. Now let's say I don't like the colors of these. It's really simple to just make some quick changes. Now there's the advanced settings, but we also created a little quick settings tab, which will make it easier for, let's say, beginners of SketchUp who don't want to deal with all the additional settings. This is just the basics of all you need to create almost any material. So I switched out the diffuse color and now it's blue. Now there's also new materials you can create by using this button here, which there's a variety of things like car paint, subsurface scattering. There's the hair material, which is ideal when you're using V-Ray fur, and I'll go over that in a little bit. And then within the materials for those advanced users, we can also create additional layers. To have layered materials which can be as complex as your imagination will allow. All right, so I'm going to stop this rendering and I'm going to show you some of the previous renderings we did, all using just the material library and using different combinations, just to show how quick and easy it is to create some design iterations with just a few clicks. All right, moving on to geometry. V-Ray for SketchUp has many features that help you deal with complex geometries in a fast and efficient manner. We have proxies, which allow you to insert complex geometry into a scene without bogging down your SketchUp model. V-Ray Fur gives you the power to easily create things like fur, grass, and carpet in your scene without bogging down your SketchUp model with the extra geometry. And then finally, the V-Ray Clipper is a powerful tool that allows you to dynamically cut your geometry using either the section planes built into SketchUp or your own unique geometry. So here's a quick demonstration of the power of proxies. You'll notice that in the SketchUp window, these are very simple triangulated forms, but in the rendering itself, they're very detailed. And it's very simple to use any geometry you make in SketchUp and to create a proxy, and it will automatically generate the triangulated forms you see. And you can also take things that you generate in other pieces of software with V-Ray installed, such as Max and Rhino, export from those as a proxy and then bring into SketchUp. Then next, we're going to go over V-Ray Fur. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create a quick rug object, just a quick little cylinder. I'm going to make this a group. And then to add the fur, I'm actually going to start a rendering first. To add the fur, all I need to do is click on the V-Ray Fur button with the object selected, and it's now covered in fur. Now fur takes the material from the base object, which right now is the simple white material. But I'm going to go ahead and use a grass material to make this look like grass. And but by default, V-Ray Fur is set up in SketchUp to mimic grass with the settings provided. And like we mentioned before with the materials, it's usually best to use a hair material for optimized performance, but any material will actually work on grass. So I'd like to make this a rug. I'm going to go ahead and switch this to a carpet material. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a few changes to the settings. So I'll go to the Geometry tab. We'll make some changes to make this look more like a carpet, like a shag carpet. The settings are usually pretty self-explanatory, so I'll adjust the length to make it shorter. I'll adjust the thickness to make the pieces thinner. And we'll adjust the bend amount. And then we'll add some more curl by using the curl settings. And finally, we'll adjust how much it tapers. And with that, with just some quick tweaking, we have a messy, shaggy carpet. All right, so finally, the V-Ray clipper. So by default, the V-Ray clipper supports the section cut tool that's built into SketchUp. So you don't have to do anything special to get it to work. You can just apply a section cut and it will cut through the model. And any object that's a solid that's cut, it will use the material that's applied to the object for the cut material. So you'll notice it's kind of hard to see at this zoom level, but the glass is still glass at the edge cut, and the solid white material is still the solid white material. You'll also notice that the lighting is being treated as though there's no section cut involved. It's also easy to enable and disable, actually. Just bring that up. But if I disable the effect lights ability, it'll treat it as though the lighting will treat it as though the section cut isn't even there. And you can also change the material of all the cut objects. So if I disable use object material, it uses a black material by default, but you can also use any material that you have in your scene materials as well. And so moving on, I'd like to, instead of using a simple plane, I'd like to use a custom shape to cut this model. So I'm going to delete the section cut. And I have a kind of a pie slice of an ellipsoid that's hidden in the scene. We'll go ahead and unhide that so you can see it. And of course it's rendering out, but all I need to do is click on the mesh clipper tool, and it now becomes a clipping object. And just like the section cuts, they have all the same options available, so I can use a custom material or have it affect lights, etc. And this is an example of a final image rendered using the mesh clipper. This was using a different kind of step-down shape. Next is the denoiser. It's a new feature added to the version 3 release of V-Ray for SketchUp that will intelligently remove noise from your final image. I'll just show you how easy it is to get it up and running. I'm going to go ahead and open the asset editor and go to my settings, and in the advanced settings under render elements, it's a render element that I need to add. And I'll go over the additional render elements in a little bit, but let's go ahead and just enable the denoiser. And we'll adjust the quality to a draft setting so we can get a bit more noise. And I'm also going to slightly decrease the noise limit for this rendering. And hit render. Now all the noise limit is just a kind of a threshold saying, so V-Ray will use that as a reference saying, okay, there's this much noise in the scene. I'll keep rendering until I reach this noise threshold of 0.3, and then I'll stop. And you can go down to a 0, but 0 could take much longer before it stops. But of course you can always stop the rendering at any time while using progressive. It's a great advantage of progressive. Like say I think this is good enough, I could stop the rendering and continue on with another rendering, let's say, or if I have a deadline. But I'm going to go ahead and let this reach that threshold and it'll stop itself. There it goes. So you'll notice I'm switching between the denoiser render element and the RGB color render element. The RGB color render element is the raw render, the raw final image, but the denoiser is an effect that's applied on top of that, which smooths out some of the noisy areas. Now, if I go to my history, I have an image that I rendered earlier at a higher resolution. You'll be able to see the effect much better. As I switch between the denoiser and the RGB color, you can see how much the effect fixes the image. Right, moving on to post-processing. V-Ray has several tools for advanced post-processing built right in. In the frame buffer, there's color corrections, which are powerful tools that allow you to do simple post-processing, similar to third-party applications like Photoshop. But this way, you don't need to put the final rendering into something like Photoshop. You can just do it all in the frame buffer while it's still rendering, or you can wait till it stops. There's lens effects, which are powerful bloom and glare tools available right inside the frame buffer. And finally, render elements, which allow you to export individual elements of the render for advanced post-processing and third-party applications like Photoshop. So I'll go ahead and enable the corrections controls. And again, you can do this while it's rendering, or you can wait till it's done. And anyone familiar with image photo manipulation software, this should all be familiar. Like there's the color curve, there's the white balance. You can also adjust the exposure, but this is more of it's not actual camera exposure like the settings in camera. This is more of a post-processing effect. So ideally you would want to make sure the exposure is mostly there before you start your final rendering. And you can even save these either individually, or you can also save them in your V-Ray history. So what we've done here is we've saved a few different versions of the same rendering with different color corrections in the history. You can see on the left here. And if I right-click on one of these, I can then load color corrections, and you'll see these are different versions of the color corrections we did to generate different effects, all without having to re-render the image or put this into something like Photoshop. Right, moving on to the lens effects. This allows you to quickly enable and easily enable effects like bloom and glare, which kind of blurs the image around the brighter areas. I would recommend checking out our docs page for a more in-depth explanation of all these controls. And then finally, let's go over the render elements. And this is more of an advanced feature, but allows you to, at render time, export essentially additional images, which can be composited in third-party software to create different effects or to have more control over your final image. And then it'll all be listed here in your list of render elements. And then we also have the extra text channel, this one right here, which allows you to generate your own custom texture to export that out, which is great for post-processing. And that one we use the dirt texture. So then if you post-process that on top of the final image, you can get some deeper shadows in the corners and such for more of a stylistic effect. And it's something, since you're post-processing these as different layers, you have a lot more control to create the final image that you're looking to create. All right, one last thing for the visualization experts. We have a new pipeline for 3D Studio Max. We've always had the ability to export VR scenes, but 3D Studio Max now has the import feature. So you can now export VR scenes from SketchUp, Rhino, Revit, and bring them into Max with all the materials and UV mapping and geometry all set and ready to go. We'll go ahead and demonstrate this now using SketchUp. Now this acts a lot like the proxy system, but it treats the whole model as a single object. So I'm exporting a VR scene now. And then in Max, I already have a scene with a light, a sunlight, and a camera. So all you need to do is go to your V-Ray objects, insert a V-Ray scene object, gives you the ability to open a VR scene file, and then there it is. So since my lighting and camera are already set up, I'm going to go ahead and hit render. And then you can see the scene came in with all the materials, the V-Ray fur came in, all set up for you. And for those of you familiar with our previous licensing system, we have some good news. We've changed our licensing from dongle to online licensing. It's designed so you can log in using your Chaos Group login information to access your licenses. And you also have the ability to check them out either for a small period of time or indefinitely for offline use. And then some more information on licensing. When you purchase a Workstation license, you'll receive a render node license as well. And if you're not using that node license, it could be used as a swarm node for other applications like other SketchUp instances running on your network, or say Revit or Rhino as well. And some of the pricing available for V-Ray for SketchUp, I'd recommend contacting your reseller, Novedge, for more information and information on monthly and yearly rentals, as well as special bundle offers and any other questions related to sales. And also I highly recommend going to our docs page, docs.chaosgroup.com, as well as our YouTube channel for more useful information on using V-Ray for SketchUp or Revit or Rhino or any of our other products. And that's it. Also, feel free to go to chaosgroup.com to sign up for a free trial. A fully unlocked 30-day trial is available. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, so you just talked about render nodes. So we have a question from Thomas. He says, I'm a bit unclear on V-Ray Swarm. Do you need an additional license for additional render nodes, or can you just install Swarm on multiple machines? And I think there's the V-Ray Universal Render node that will allow you to use it up to, I think, 5 additional machines, but I don't know, do you know?
Well, essentially, a render node is a computer that's rendering is going to use a render node license, and so for each additional swarm machine would need a render node license. But say I purchased 2 licenses for 2 different machines, and I'm rendering from one machine. The machine will use one node to render on itself, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'll use another node license on the second machine that it's using for Swarm.
Okay. So if somebody purchases the universal render node, so you would have to purchase a render node for each machine?
Yes, but each workstation will come with a node license with it.
Okay. Okay.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
Hope that it's clear, Tom. And also we have a question about, so when we're talking about sunlight, and Thomas is also asking, so we can decrease the intensity and change the filter color to blue for moonlight. Is that a possibility?
Changing the filter color will change the color of the sun itself.
Okay. So
but the intensity will make it, you can make it brighter by increasing the intensity.
all right. And V-Ray scan, is V-Ray Scan available for SketchUp, right?
VR scans?
Yes.
Actually, I would have to double check, but
Okay.
it should work, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I actually come from the Revit world mostly, but
Yeah, no. Okay. Okay.
but I can definitely get back to you on that.
Okay. Somebody, Jim, noticed that the caps didn't turn blue in the SU window. For low resolution SU animations from scenes, the material adjustment won't show?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Okay, this is the question. I noticed the caps didn't turn blue in the SU window. For low
Okay.
resolution SU animations from scenes, will the material adjustments show or not?
Oh, I think I understand. Let me switch over to SketchUp. So, sorry, bear with me 1 second.
No, thank you for bringing up a real example that really helps us all.
So SketchUp doesn't quite have the ability to show our textures properly. So for some textures, such as the cups, for example, it chooses a texture to represent it. So if I go to my, where's my material properties? So, sorry, just bear with me for a few more
No
seconds.
problem.
So apply to material. There we go. So for some materials like this one, I'm not actually using a texture for the diffuse, but in order for UV mapping to show properly, the mapping of the textures to the surface, we need to show something in SketchUp. So you actually choose which texture you want to show up here by, if I go into material. So right now I'm using this, I can use this texture simply by selecting this. And this is really just a placeholder, and you'll notice inside SketchUp itself it's using a placeholder texture, and that's so you can make sure that your texture sizing is correct. It's kind of hard to quickly explain this. Feel free to, I guess, reach out to me after the webinar, but it's a placeholder inside SketchUp, but when you hit render, it will come through as the correct material.
Cool. Okay. We trust you. Yeah. Okay. So if you edit a material in a drawing, does it only affect the material in that drawing?
Yes. So the material library, you can think of this as being read-only, but then as soon as you bring that material into your material list, any changes you make to this material will not affect the material in the library.
All right.
And then, of course, you can actually save these materials as well.
Cool. All right. I think that's it for questions for now. So, but we're, hanging around a couple of, extra minutes. So if you have more questions, we'll be here. In the meantime, I want to thank Ben for really being on top of all the features and explaining so clearly. Thank you so much. And I will take the screen back, so I want to show you where you can actually come and get V-Ray for SketchUp or any V-Ray. So I want to thank everybody for attending. You'll be able to see this is the Novedge page. There's a product. If you have questions, you can always contact us as well. And I know Ben was so kind to leave his email at the beginning of the presentation. So in the recording of this webinar, you can go and write it down. And thank you so much for attending today. And yeah, give it a try. Give us, come visit Novedge at novedge.com. And also you can follow us on Facebook, Google+, Twitter. And actually not next week, but in 2 weeks, we'll have a webinar on 3D PDF myths and truth. And as I said, this webinar has been recorded, and if you want to watch this or any other webinar on our playlist, come to the Novedge channels on YouTube and Vimeo. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Have a wonderful day, and thank you, Ben. Bye-bye.
No problem. Have a good day.